over the past 2 decades, there has been an increasing focus on helping engineering educators to better understand their contexts, the nature of curriculum, teaching, learning, and assessment strategies to enable our engineering graduates to meet the socioeconomic and socio-technical needs of our societies. One of the key ways to facilitate this kind of capacity building is through practice sharing, the very purpose of this conference and the various organizations associated with engineering education. For the most part, though, our practices as engineering education practitioners and researchers are shared through formal publications, conference proceedings, journal articles, and books. The dilemma for engineering education in the Global South is that much of the formal published work originates in the Global North. Let me just say a word about this divide. There have been criticisms that the brunt line may be oversimplistic and outdated, but it remains commonly used in social studies literature for its validity in certain metrics like inequality and political dissatisfaction. Now, the Global South accounts for approximately 83% of the world's population as of 2021. And today, I'm going to be talking about the thematic differences in engineering education concerns driven by our key research question: how can we enable scholarly, informed, and holistic engineering education in a Global South context? We're a group of engineering education practitioners and researchers located at a research-intensive institution in South Africa. Now, our faculty and institution have formally been engaged in staff capacity building initiatives for a number of years. Now, our particular initiatives in the faculty are part of a Recommended Engineering Education Practices project. We call this WEEP. Now, individually and collectively, we've been attempting to address challenges typical of the Global South: large class contexts, an increasingly diverse student body from language, cultural, and prior schooling perspectives, as well as infrastructure and resource constraints. Now, in our efforts to develop scholarly approaches to understanding and addressing our engineering education context, many academics have expressed the opinion that much of the available literature is either inaccessible, there's very theoretical, or doesn't actually practically speak to our kinds of contexts. So as a group, over time, we began to search for literature that would be useful to us and that would enable scholarly, informed, and holistic engineering education in our Global South context. 7 years later, we found that we have a fairly representative database of engineering education literature from both the Global North and the Global South that has helped to shape our collective practices. It's an analysis of this database that we're presenting to you today, with the hope of shedding light on thematic differences that could enable improved engagement across the Global North and Global South divide. I'll explain the limitation of the database a little later in the presentation. So our first step was to conduct a broad scientometric analysis of education-themed publications, which reveals the obvious Global North dominance. Although it's heartening to see a steady increase in the Global South literature, that's the graph on the left, citations of work from the Global South remain low. Now, this has a number of implications which I'm not going to touch on just yet. I just need to point out that bibliometric indicators are seen as inadequate indicators in different socioeconomic contexts. But, as per the brunt line, they also remain widely used across research and determine things like research impact. Now, secondly, engineering education specifically isn't available as a category for analysis in the system that we used. So the use of general education publications, we felt, enabled a broad overview of the Global North, Global South divide. In order to develop a more qualitative understanding of the thematic differences in engineering education-specific literature, we turned to our earlier collaborative paper presented at WEEF in 2019, where we looked at the proceedings of our national South African Society for Engineering Education conferences. Now, for that paper, we used an instrument from legitimation code theory called the specialization plane. The LCD specialization dimension is useful for differentiating between a knowledge practice which foregrounds either knowledge as the basis of legitimacy or knower attributes or dispositions, or relations between these, or obviously both, or neither. Now, in that analysis, we saw a predominant focus in our South African, mainly engineering education literature, on knowers, our students, their development, professional and so called soft skills. Now, the work also demonstrated a shift over the decade under analysis from statistical analyses towards more technological and professional skills integration. So we were interested in taking this analysis further, hence our paper today. Now, as part of our REAP project, we had gathered over 500 publications that addressed our particular concerns. Now, that obviously represents the first bias. Secondly, all the papers that we have collected are in English, which thus excludes a whole number of studies. Now, in this analysis, we see from the global north, we've got a fair sampling of literature across multiple sites from the US, Europe, UK and Ireland, Australia, Canada, and other countries. In the global south, we have to declare that South Africa constituted approximately 86% of the studies considered, given, of course, the context-specific relevance to our REAP group. Now, all papers have been added over the years to a central repository and their data summarized in an online collaborative spreadsheet system. Now, we've used this database over the years as a background to our various engineering education initiatives and have applied multiple coding schemes depending on the focus of a particular project or case study. Now, for this paper, we consolidated and grouped the different themes and sub-themes, and each publication has now been classified according to a singular main theme and, if appropriate, multiple sub-themes. Now, these search terms represent primary REAP concerns around resources, large classes, deep learning strategies, and assessment practices. What we then did was to take a look at each paper and determine its broader legitimation code theory specialization focus. We call this soft focus thematic coding. Now, these are a few examples of those themes and sub-themes on our specialization plane. When we quantified the different papers according to their general focus and the specialization code, we find the following. What we see is a good overlap, but with a greater focus on the elite quadrant in the global north, whereas we have a greater focus on the relativist and knowledge quadrants in the global south. Now, we'd like to offer an interpretation of this. In terms of the relativist code, we believe this may be the result of higher education management grappling with persistently poor retention and throughput, which has a significant impact on potential economic growth, as reported, in fact, across the BRICS countries, all of them in the global south. Now, the greater focus on the relativist legitimation code specialization quadrant in the south offers lessons to increasingly diverse global north, specifically in terms of managing resources and supplying support and engagement amidst increasing financial constraints and massification. We believe that our greater focus in the global south, although this might be a particularly South African phenomenon, on the knowledge quadrant, is about our attempts to understand the implications of curriculum shifts and poor student throughput over the past 2 decades. Now, when we look at the difference between our main and sub-theme categories, we see less than a 4% normalized difference across the majority of categories. In terms of main themes, the global north has placed significantly greater focus on learning and engagement, where the global south in turn has placed greater focus on curriculum, soft skills, and what we've here termed general in terms of the main theme. And that general comprises general engineering profession papers, academic pathway, success rates, and community outreach projects, which are one of the forms for integrating theory and practice. But we didn't include that because that was not a specific category in the global north. Now, in terms of sub-themes, the global north sees a greater focus on learning, whereas the global south places a greater focus on resources, which is obvious considering our socioeconomic circumstances, and that this will remain a focus for the foreseeable future. Now, in conclusion, while we know that the global south remains underrepresented in the literature, there is encouraging alignment between our engineering education research interests. What we do suggest is that the global south has grappled with challenges in innovative ways that may well benefit engineering education researchers in the global north. For our particular REAP community, with increasing forms of collaboration across the African continent, for example, we believe that this study offers an opportunity for more efficient and possibly effective collaboration based on strengths in our various regions, so that we as a global community of practice can tackle the challenges of our time. Thank you very much.